Welcome to the world of science fiction, where extraordinary stories come to life. If you've subscribed for more stories, enjoy the ride now. The storm hit Zirian, 7 like nature's way of reminding everyone that some planets really weren't meant for human habitation. Sergeant Marcus Stone pulled his thermal suit tighter and squinted through his visor at the abandoned research station barely visible through the swirling snow. The structure looked about as welcoming as a tax audit, but it was shelter, and on a planet where the ambient temperature could freeze spit before it hit the ground, shelter trumped aesthetics every time. "Control, this is Stone," he said into his comm unit, fighting to be heard over the howling wind. "Taking shelter at grid reference 77 Alpha until this blizzard decides to take a vacation." Static crackled back at him, which could have meant acknowledgement or could have meant his communications were being scrambled by the electromagnetic interference that made Zirian 7 such a popular choice for people who didn't want to be found. Given that his patrol route specifically covered sectors where people came to disappear, Marcus was betting on the latter. The research station's airlock cycled with a wheeze that suggested the mechanism was running on stubbornness and spare parts. Marcus stepped into the cramped entry chamber, his boots clanking against metal flooring that had seen better decades. The interior was dark except for the pale glow of emergency lighting, and it smelled like recycled air, old electronics, and something else he couldn't quite identify. "Hello?" he called out, more from habit than expectation. Abandoned research stations on ice planets weren't exactly known for their hospitality. What he didn't expect was a response. It came as a soft sound, not quite a groan, not quite a whisper, from somewhere deeper in the station. Marcus immediately shifted into alert mode, his hand moving instinctively to the plasma rifle slung across his shoulder. People who ended up on Zirian 7 during blizzards generally fell into 2 categories: researchers who'd lost track of time, and criminals who'd run out of places to run. "Hello?" he called again, louder this time. "Anyone there?" "I'm with the Frontier Guard." The sound came again, definitely human and definitely in distress. Marcus activated his suit's tactical lighting and moved deeper into the station, following a corridor lined with dormant scientific equipment and computer terminals that had been shut down so long they'd accumulated a layer of frost. He found her in what had probably been the station's common area, curled up in a corner between an overturned table and a bank of dead monitors. She was clearly hypothermic. Her skin had the waxy pallor that meant her body was shutting down non-essential functions to preserve core temperature, and she was shivering so violently that Marcus could hear her teeth chattering from across the room. "Hey there," he said softly, approaching the way he might approach an injured animal. "I'm Marcus. I'm here to help." She looked up at him with eyes that took a moment to focus, and Marcus got his first good look at her face. Even half frozen and clearly exhausted, she was striking in a way that made him think of classical sculptures: high cheekbones, aristocratic features, and ears that swept back in elegant points that immediately marked her as non-human. Her hair was dark and tangled, and she wore the remnants of what might once have been expensive clothing, now torn and stained from whatever had brought her to this frozen wasteland. "Please," she whispered, the word barely audible through blue lips. "Cold. So cold." Marcus's military training kicked in immediately. Hypothermia was a killer, and she was clearly in the advanced stages. He stripped off his pack and activated the portable heater, setting it to maximum output while pulling out his emergency blankets and chemical heat packs. "Okay, I'm going to get you warmed up," he said, wrapping the thermal blankets around her shivering form. "What's your name? How did you get here?" She tried to answer, but the words came out in a language his universal translator didn't recognize, something melodic and flowing that sounded like it belonged in poetry rather than emergency medical situations. Marcus caught what sounded like names mixed in with the foreign phrases, but nothing that helped him understand how she'd ended up alone in an abandoned research station during the worst storm Zirian 7 had seen in months. "Hey, stay with me," Marcus said, noting that her eyes were starting to drift closed. "I know it's tempting, but sleeping right now is a really bad idea." He activated 3 more heat packs and tucked them around her body, then started working on getting her circulation moving again. Her hands were like ice, the fingers stiff and unresponsive, but he could feel a pulse at her wrists that was thready but steady. "That's it," he murmured, massaging her hands to encourage blood flow. "You're going to be fine. Just need to get your body temperature back up to something that won't kill you." She drifted in and out of consciousness as he worked, sometimes mumbling in that unknown language, sometimes switching to heavily accented standard Galactic that he could understand but just barely. He caught fragments about running, about being afraid, about people who couldn't find her here. None of it made complete sense, but the fear in her voice was unmistakable. Marcus pulled out his own sleeping bag and spread it near the heater, then carefully lifted her and settled her inside it. The close contact was necessary for treating severe hypothermia. Shared body heat was often the difference between life and death, but he could see the confusion and alarm in her eyes as awareness flickered back. "It's okay," he said calmly. "Medical necessity. Your body temperature is dangerously low, and this is standard treatment for hypothermia. I'm not going to hurt you." She seemed to understand, though she remained tense against him as he zipped the sleeping bag around both of them and adjusted the heater to maintain steady warmth. Outside, the blizzard continued to howl, rattling the station's walls and reminding Marcus that they weren't going anywhere until the storm decided to move on. "What's your name?" he asked again, hoping that getting her talking would help keep her conscious. "Sarah," she said after a moment, her voice still weak but more coherent than before. "Serafina. Nice to meet you, Serafina. I'm Marcus Stone, sergeant with the Frontier Guard. What were you doing out there in the storm?" She was quiet for so long that he thought she'd fallen asleep again. When she finally spoke, her words were careful, as if she were choosing each one deliberately. "Running," she said simply. "From people who wish me harm. On Zirian 7. That's some serious commitment to avoiding someone. This isn't exactly a tourist destination." A sound that might have been a laugh escaped her lips. "No. It is not." Marcus felt some of the tension leave her body as the warmth began to take effect, her shivering gradually subsiding to occasional tremors. Her breathing was steadier now, and when he checked her pulse, it was stronger and more regular. "Better?" he asked. "Yes. Thank you." She was quiet for a moment, then added, "You are very kind to help a stranger." "It's my job," Marcus replied, though even as he said it, he knew it wasn't entirely true. His job was frontier patrol and maintaining security in the outer systems. Search and rescue fell under his duties technically, but going out of his way to save someone he'd found by accident was something else entirely. "Is it your job to risk your own safety for someone you know nothing about?" Marcus considered that. Outside of emergency situations, he would have called for backup, followed protocols, done things by the book. But the storm had made communication impossible, and she'd been dying when he found her. Sometimes doing the right thing meant ignoring the rule book. "Sometimes," he said finally. "Though I have to admit, finding frozen royalty in abandoned research stations wasn't covered in basic training." "Royalty?" Marcus felt her tense again and mentally kicked himself. "Figure of speech. You just carry yourself like someone important. Even half frozen and hiding in a corner." She relaxed slightly, but he could feel her thinking, processing his words in a way that suggested he'd hit closer to the truth than either of them was comfortable with. "I am no one important," she said quietly. "Just someone who made poor choices and ended up in a very cold place." "We've all been there," Marcus replied. "Though usually not literally." They settled into comfortable silence, listening to the storm rage outside while the heater worked to restore her body temperature to something compatible with continued existence. Marcus found himself studying her face in the dim light, noting the way her features suggested breeding and education, the kind of unconscious poise that came from growing up with expectations and responsibilities. Whatever had brought Serafina to Zirian 7, it wasn't ordinary desperation. People didn't flee to ice planets in expensive clothes unless they were running from something serious enough to make a frozen wasteland look like a viable option. But that was her business. His business was keeping her alive until the storm passed and they could get off this planet safely. Marcus, she said softly. Yeah. Thank you. For not asking questions I cannot answer. Marcus smiled in the darkness. Everyone's got secrets, Serafina. I figure as long as yours don't involve shooting at me, we'll get along fine. They do not involve shooting at you. Then we're good. Outside, the blizzard continued its assault on the research station, but inside their improvised shelter, warmth was slowly winning its battle against the cold. Marcus felt Serafina's breathing even out as exhaustion finally claimed her, her body relaxing completely against his as sleep took over. He stayed awake, monitoring her condition and listening for any change in the storm's intensity. Tomorrow they'd figure out how to get her to safety. Tonight, it was enough that she was alive and warm and no longer fading away in a frozen corner of an abandoned station. Sometimes, Marcus reflected, the job was exactly what it was supposed to be, helping people who needed help, no questions asked, no politics involved. Just one person making sure another person made it through the night. It was a good feeling. Marcus woke to the sound of someone rummaging through supply cabinets with the focused determination of someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. The storm had finally passed sometime during the night, leaving behind the kind of crystalline silence that only came after nature had finished throwing its tantrum. Pale sunlight filtered through the research station's frost-covered windows, turning everything into a winter wonderland that would be beautiful if it weren't still trying to kill them. Morning, he said, sitting up in his sleeping bag and immediately missing the shared warmth. Feeling better? Serafina turned from where she'd been examining the station's emergency medical kit, and Marcus was relieved to see that her color had returned to something approaching normal. Her dark hair was still tangled, and her clothes were still the worse for wear, but she moved with steady grace instead of the brittle fragility of the night before. Much better, thank you. She held up a packet of antiseptic wipes. I was hoping to find supplies to tend these properly. For the first time, Marcus noticed the cuts on her hands and arms, thin lines that looked like they'd come from sharp metal or broken glass. They weren't deep, but they'd need cleaning to prevent infection. Here, let me help, Marcus said, pulling his field medical kit from his pack. I've got proper antiseptic and bandages. That is not necessary. I can manage. I'm sure you can, but two people work faster than one, and we should get moving once you're patched up. Marcus opened his kit and pulled out sterile gauze and medical tape. Besides, I'm trained in field medicine. It's part of the job. Serafina hesitated, and Marcus got the distinct impression that she wasn't used to accepting help with anything, let alone something as basic as first aid. But practicality won out over pride, and she extended her hands for him to examine. What happened? Marcus asked as he cleaned the cuts with gentle efficiency. These look like you went through a window. Something like that. Her voice was carefully neutral, but Marcus caught the tension in her shoulders. There was an incident. I had to leave quickly. Bad breakup? To his surprise, Serafina laughed, a genuine sound of amusement that transformed her entire face. You could say that, though it was more of a professional disagreement than a personal one. Ah, workplace drama. Say no more. Marcus applied antibiotic ointment to the cleaned cuts, noting that they were already beginning to heal with the accelerated rate common to most humanoid species. I once had to transfer to a different sector because my commanding officer and I had philosophical differences about proper maintenance protocols. Philosophical differences? He thought following regulations was more important than making sure equipment actually worked. I thought making sure equipment worked was more important than following regulations that were written by people who'd never used the equipment. Marcus began wrapping her hands with practiced precision. Turns out the brass sided with philosophy over practicality. That must have been frustrating. It was educational. Taught me that sometimes doing the right thing means accepting that you're going to be doing it somewhere else. Marcus secured the last bandage and sat back to examine his work. There. That should keep them clean while they heal. Serafina flexed her fingers, testing the bandages. You are very skilled at this. Frontier Guard training covers a lot of ground. We're usually the only medical assistants available for light years in any direction. Marcus started packing up his kit, then paused. Speaking of which, what exactly are you doing out here? Zirian 7 isn't exactly a popular destination for, what is it you do? Another hesitation, longer this time. I study cultural dynamics. Comparative governmental systems, social structures, the way different societies organize themselves. A political scientist. Something like that. Marcus accepted the evasion with a nod. Everyone had their reasons for being vague about their background, especially on frontier planets where asking too many questions was considered rude at best and dangerous at worst. Well, political scientist Serafina, we should probably figure out how to get you off this ice cube before whoever you're running from decides to brave the weather. He activated his comm unit and was rewarded with clear static instead of the garbled interference of the night before. Control, this is Stone. Storm's passed and I'm operational. I've got a civilian in need of transport off-planet. The response came through clearly this time. Stone, this is Control. We show no scheduled civilian transports for your sector. What's her story? Marcus glanced at Serafina, who was listening with the kind of focused attention that suggested she understood more about military protocols than most civilians. Refugee situation. She was stranded by the storm and needs safe passage to, where do you need to go? Anywhere with regular transport connections, Serafina said. I can arrange my own travel from there. Civilian needs transport to a hub world, Marcus reported. Can we get a pickup? Negative on immediate pickup, Stone. We've got priority missions taking all available transport for the next 48 hours. Can you escort her to the mining station at grid reference 12 Alpha? They've got commercial traffic scheduled for tomorrow. Marcus looked at Serafina again, noting the way she'd gone very still during the exchange. That work for you? Yes. Thank you. Affirmative, Control. We'll make for the mining station. Stone out. Marcus closed the comm channel and started gathering his gear. Looks like we've got a day's hike ahead of us. You up for it? I will manage. I'm sure you will, but managing and being comfortable are two different things. Marcus pulled a spare thermal undergarment from his pack. This might be a little big, but it'll keep you warmer than what you're wearing. Serafina accepted the garment with visible reluctance. You have already done more than enough. I cannot continue to impose. You're not imposing. You're accepting help from someone who's offering it freely. Marcus turned away to give her privacy while she changed. Besides, keeping civilians alive and healthy is literally part of my job description. Is that what I am to you? A job? The question caught Marcus off guard, partly because of the way she asked it, not confrontational or offended, but genuinely curious, as if the answer mattered more than it should have. Honestly? Last night you were a job. Someone in medical distress who needed immediate assistance. He kept his voice casual while she rustled with the thermal clothing behind him. This morning. I don't know. You're someone I'd like to make sure gets where she needs to go safely. The difference being? The difference being that jobs end when you file the paperwork. This feels more like responsibility. Personal responsibility. I see. Marcus wasn't sure she did, but he also wasn't entirely sure he understood it himself. Something about Serafina made him want to be better than just professionally competent, made him want to actually care about the outcome rather than just completing the mission. All right, she said, and Marcus turned to find her wearing his spare thermal gear under her damaged outer clothing. The thermal suit was indeed too large for her, but it would provide the insulation she needed for the journey ahead. I am ready. They made good time across the frozen landscape, following a route Marcus had scouted on previous patrols. The terrain was harsh but not technically difficult, and Serafina proved to be surprisingly capable on the ice and snow. She moved with the kind of sure-footed confidence that suggested experience in challenging environments, though Marcus noticed she favored her left leg slightly and took longer breaks than someone in peak condition would need. "You're hurt," he observed during their third rest stop, watching her carefully massage her thigh through the thermal suit. "It is nothing serious. An old injury that stiffens in the cold. Want me to take a look?" "No." The response was immediate and definite. "It will be fine once we reach warmer temperatures." Marcus let it go, but he made a mental note to keep an eye on her mobility as the day wore on. The mining station was still 8 kilometers away, and he'd rather know about problems before they became emergencies. "Can I ask you something?" Serafina said as they resumed walking. "Shoot. Why did you choose this assignment?" "Frontier patrol seems lonely." Marcus considered the question while navigating around a field of ice formations that jutted from the ground like crystal spears. "I like the quiet. And I like helping people who actually need help instead of people who just think they do." "You have experience with people who think they need help but do not." "Oh, yeah. Spent 3 years on a diplomatic protection detail before this assignment. Politicians, trade negotiators, cultural attaches, all very important people with very important problems that usually boiled down to someone not showing them the exact level of respect they thought they deserved." "That sounds frustrating." It was. Especially when you'd see real problems, poverty, disease, people actually dying, getting ignored because the important people were too busy arguing about protocol and precedents. Marcus helped her navigate over a particularly steep section of packed snow. "Out here, problems are simple. People need food, shelter, medical attention, or safe transport. You provide it, problem solved. And you find that satisfying?" "I find it honest." Marcus glanced at her, noting the way she was listening with the kind of focused attention that suggested she was filing away his answers for future reference. "What about you? What made you want to study political systems?" "I suppose I wanted to understand why some societies thrive while others struggle. Why some leaders inspire loyalty while others rule through fear. The dynamics that determine whether a civilization grows or stagnates. Find any answers?" Serafina was quiet for a long moment, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air as she considered her response. "I am beginning to think that the most important factor is not the structure of government or the efficiency of institutions, but simply whether those in positions of authority remember that they serve people, not the other way around." "That's a pretty radical conclusion for a political scientist." "Is it? Most of the political types I've met seem to think people exist to serve the system, not that the system should serve people." "Then perhaps they are the wrong people to be making such decisions." Marcus looked at her again, struck by the quiet conviction in her voice and the way she spoke about governance as if it were something personal rather than academic. "You know, for someone who studies politics, you sound like you've got some pretty strong opinions about how things should work." "Do I?" she asked, but there was something in her tone that suggested she was asking herself the question as much as him. They walked the rest of the way to the mining station in comfortable companionship, their conversation ranging from philosophical discussions about leadership to practical observations about surviving in hostile environments. By the time they reached the station's perimeter, Marcus had developed a genuine respect for Serafina's intelligence and resilience, though he was no closer to understanding what had brought her to Zirion 7 or why she seemed so carefully evasive about her background. The mining station was exactly what Marcus had expected, a collection of prefabricated structures arranged around a central hub, all designed for maximum efficiency rather than comfort or aesthetics. It was functional, reliable, and completely without charm, which made it perfect for frontier operations where appearance mattered less than getting the job done. "Well," Marcus said as they approached the main administrative building, "this is where we part ways. Commercial transport should be here tomorrow morning to take you wherever you need to go." Serafina stopped walking and turned to face him, her expression serious. "Marcus, I want you to know that what you did for me, it was not just professional duty. You went beyond what anyone could reasonably expect, and you did it for someone you knew nothing about. Like I said, it's what anyone would do." "No," she replied firmly. It is what you would do. Not everyone would have risked their own safety for a stranger, especially one who could not even tell them why they were in danger. Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks, uncomfortable with praise that felt more significant than it should have. Well, I'm glad you're safe. As am I. Perhaps our paths will cross again someday. Maybe they will. Marcus extended his hand, and she shook it with the kind of formal precision that again reminded him that whatever her background, she was someone accustomed to ceremony and protocol. Take care of yourself, Serafina. And you, Marcus Stone. He watched her walk into the mining station, noting how she straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin as she approached the administrative desk, small changes in posture that transformed her from a refugee seeking help into someone accustomed to being listened to and obeyed. Marcus shook his head and activated his comm unit to report successful completion of his mission. Whatever Serafina's story was, it wasn't his business anymore. She was safe, she'd be off-planet soon, and he could get back to the simple, honest work of frontier patrol. Though he had to admit, he was going to miss the company. Marcus was halfway through his morning equipment check when the first plasma bolt burned a hole through the mining station's main communications array. The blast lit up the pre-dawn darkness like a miniature sun, followed immediately by the distinctive whine of military-grade energy weapons being charged for another volley. Well, Marcus muttered, diving behind a supply crate as the second shot scorched the air where his head had been, this is new. The attack was coming from 3 directions at once, which suggested either very good planning or very bad luck, depending on your perspective. Marcus activated his comm unit while pulling his plasma rifle from its carrying case. Control, this is Stone. Mining Station 12 Alpha is under attack by unknown hostiles. Request immediate backup. Static answered him. The communications array was definitely out of commission. Stone. Marcus. The voice came from inside the administrative building, high with fear and urgency. Serafina. Marcus sprinted toward the building in a series of cover-to-cover movements that his instructors would have been proud of, if they weren't currently several star systems away and unable to help. More plasma fire erupted around him, but the shots seemed aimed more at suppression than elimination. Someone wanted to pin him down rather than kill him outright. He found Serafina pressed against the wall beside the building's main window, her face pale but her hands steady as she gripped what looked like a mining tool that had been hastily repurposed as a weapon. Are you hurt? Marcus asked, quickly scanning her for injuries. No, but they have the building surrounded. I counted at least 6, possibly more. Any idea who they are? Serafina's expression flickered with something that looked like guilt mixed with resignation. Yes. They are here for me. Bounty hunters? Something like that. She met his eyes directly. Marcus, there are things about my situation that I have not told you. Things that. Her explanation was cut off by a voice amplified through external speakers, projected from somewhere beyond the building's perimeter. The voice was cold, professional, and spoke with the kind of absolute confidence that came from holding all the tactical advantages. Serafina Valdris, Princess of the Celestial Confederacy and heir to the throne of 17 star systems. You are commanded to surrender immediately and submit to escort back to the capital world for your own protection. Marcus felt the world shift slightly around him, like finding out that the ground you'd been standing on was actually the edge of a cliff. Princess. Heir to 17 star systems. He looked at Serafina, Princess Serafina, who was watching his face with the kind of careful attention people paid when they were waiting to see if someone was about to become an enemy. Princess, he said slowly. Yes. Heir to the throne. Yes. Of 17 star systems. Yes. Marcus processed this information while plasma fire continued to light up the area outside their hiding spot. Okay. So when you said you were running from a professional disagreement, there has been a coup attempt. My father is dead, my mother is missing, and approximately half the Confederacy military has declared loyalty to my uncle, who believes the throne should pass to him rather than to me. Her voice was steady, but Marcus could hear the pain underneath the royal composure. The people outside represent one faction or another. I am not certain which. And you didn't think this was worth mentioning yesterday? I was not certain you would continue to help me if you knew the truth. Marcus stared at her for a moment, then started laughing, not hysterical laughter, but the kind of rueful amusement that came from recognizing the absurdity of a situation that had spiraled completely beyond anyone's control. Princess, he said, checking the charge on his plasma rifle, yesterday I was a frontier guard on routine patrol. Today I'm apparently involved in an interstellar succession crisis. My help a stranger policy is going to need some serious revision after this. I understand if you wish to. Princess Valdris, the amplified voice continued from outside, you have 60 seconds to surrender yourself, after which we will begin eliminating any individuals providing you with assistance. Well, that settles that, Marcus said, moving to the window to assess their tactical situation. Nobody threatens to eliminate me without at least buying me dinner first. He counted 7 figures in combat armor positioned around the building's perimeter, professional mercenaries, from the look of their equipment and positioning. They'd chosen their approach well, using the pre-dawn darkness and the mining station's industrial layout to establish overlapping fields of fire that made escape nearly impossible. Nearly impossible, but not completely impossible. Marcus had been in worse situations, though admittedly none of them had involved protecting galactic royalty from succession disputes. How good are you with that mining tool? He asked Serafina. Adequate. Though I should mention that my education included tactical training as well as political theory. Of course it did. Marcus pulled 2 spare power cells from his equipment pack and handed them to her. Can you operate a plasma rifle? Yes. Good. We're going to have to fight our way out of this, and I'm going to need someone watching my back who knows which end of the weapon does the damage. Marcus handed her his backup sidearm, a compact plasma pistol that was designed for close-quarters combat, and was pleased to see her check the charge and safety mechanisms with practiced efficiency. What is the plan? She asked. The plan is to make enough noise and confusion that they can't maintain their perimeter, then break contact and get to the transport pad before they regroup. Marcus moved to the building's rear exit, peering through the reinforced window at the terrain beyond. The commercial transport isn't scheduled until this afternoon, but there should be at least one emergency shuttle that we can. Marcus was halfway through his morning equipment check when the first plasma bolt burned a hole through the mining station's main communications array. The blast lit up the pre-dawn darkness like a miniature sun, followed immediately by the distinctive whine of military-grade energy weapons being charged for another volley. Well, Marcus muttered, diving behind a supply crate as the second shot scorched the air where his head had been, this is new. The attack was coming from 3 directions at once, which suggested either very good planning or very bad luck, depending on your perspective. Marcus activated his comm unit while pulling his plasma rifle from its carrying case. Control, this is Stone. Mining Station 12 Alpha is under attack by unknown hostiles. Request immediate backup. Static answered him. The communications array was definitely out of commission. Stone. Marcus. The voice came from inside the administrative building, high with fear and urgency. Serafina. Marcus sprinted toward the building in a series of cover-to-cover movements that his instructors would have been proud of, if they weren't currently several star systems away and unable to help. More plasma fire erupted around him, but the shots seemed aimed more at suppression than elimination. Someone wanted to pin him down rather than kill him outright. He found Serafina pressed against the wall beside the building's main window, her face pale but her hands steady as she gripped what looked like a mining tool that had been hastily repurposed as a weapon. Are you hurt? Marcus asked, quickly scanning her for injuries. No, but they have the building surrounded. I counted at least 6, possibly more. Any idea who they are? Serafina's expression flickered with something that looked like guilt mixed with resignation. Yes. They are here for me. Bounty hunters? Something like that. She met his eyes directly. Marcus, there are things about my situation that I have not told you. Things that... Her explanation was cut off by a voice amplified through external speakers, projected from somewhere beyond the building's perimeter. The voice was cold, professional, and spoke with the kind of absolute confidence that came from holding all the tactical advantages. Serafina Valdris, Princess of the Celestial Confederacy and heir to the throne of 17 star systems. You are commanded to surrender immediately and submit to escort back to the capital world for your own protection. Marcus felt the world shift slightly around him, like finding out that the ground you'd been standing on was actually the edge of a cliff. Princess. Heir to 17 star systems. He looked at Serafina, Princess Serafina, who was watching his face with the kind of careful attention people paid when they were waiting to see if someone was about to become an enemy. Princess, he said slowly. Yes. Heir to the throne. Yes. Of 17 star systems. Yes. Marcus processed this information while plasma fire continued to light up the area outside their hiding spot. Okay. So when you said you were running from a professional disagreement, there has been a coup attempt. My father is dead, my mother is missing, and approximately half the Confederacy military has declared loyalty to my uncle, who believes the throne should pass to him rather than to me. Her voice was steady, but Marcus could hear the pain underneath the royal composure. The people outside represent one faction or another. I am not certain which. And you didn't think this was worth mentioning yesterday? I was not certain you would continue to help me if you knew the truth. Marcus stared at her for a moment, then started laughing, not hysterical laughter, but the kind of rueful amusement that came from recognizing the absurdity of a situation that had spiraled completely beyond anyone's control. Princess, he said, checking the charge on his plasma rifle, yesterday I was a frontier guard on routine patrol. Today I'm apparently involved in an interstellar succession crisis. My help a stranger policy is going to need some serious revision after this. I understand if you wish to. Princess Valdris, the amplified voice continued from outside, you have 60 seconds to surrender yourself, after which we will begin eliminating any individuals providing you with assistance. Well, that settles that, Marcus said, moving to the window to assess their tactical situation. Nobody threatens to eliminate me without at least buying me dinner first. He counted 7 figures in combat armor positioned around the building's perimeter, professional mercenaries, from the look of their equipment and positioning. They'd chosen their approach well, using the pre-dawn darkness and the mining station's industrial layout to establish overlapping fields of fire that made escape nearly impossible. Nearly impossible, but not completely impossible. Marcus had been in worse situations, though admittedly none of them had involved protecting galactic royalty from succession disputes. How good are you with that mining tool? He asked Serafina. Adequate. Though I should mention that my education included tactical training as well as political theory. Of course it did. Marcus pulled 2 spare power cells from his equipment pack and handed them to her. Can you operate a plasma rifle? Yes. Good. We're going to have to fight our way out of this, and I'm going to need someone watching my back who knows which end of the weapon does the damage. Marcus handed her his backup sidearm, a compact plasma pistol that was designed for close-quarters combat, and was pleased to see her check the charge and safety mechanisms with practiced efficiency. What is the plan? She asked. The plan is to make enough noise and confusion that they can't maintain their perimeter, then break contact and get to the transport pad before they regroup. Marcus moved to the building's rear exit, peering through the reinforced window at the terrain beyond. The commercial transport isn't scheduled until this afternoon, but there should be at least one emergency shuttle that we can. He trailed off, staring at the scene outside. What is it? The transport pad's occupied. Looks like our friends out there brought their own ride. Marcus could see a sleek combat shuttle sitting on the platform, its design clearly military despite the lack of identifying markings. Which means either we take their ship, or we figure out another way off this rock. 30 seconds, Princess, the voice announced. We would prefer to avoid unnecessary casualties, but our orders are quite specific regarding acceptable losses in the course of completing this mission. Acceptable losses, Marcus muttered. I really hate people who talk about acceptable losses. He activated the building's emergency lighting system, flooding the perimeter with harsh illumination that would disrupt the attacker's night vision equipment. Immediately, plasma fire began hitting the building from multiple directions as the mercenaries adjusted to the changed conditions. Stealing a military shuttle from professional mercenaries turned out to be surprisingly straightforward when you had access to a mining station's explosive charges and a princess who knew how to override shuttle security systems. The hard part was doing it without getting killed in the process. The access codes for military transports follow standardized protocols, Serafina explained as they made their way toward the transport pad using a route that involved crawling through drainage pipes and maintenance tunnels. As a member of the royal family, I have emergency override authority for any vessel operating in Confederacy space. Even mercenary ships. Especially mercenary ships. They have to maintain legitimate registration to operate legally, which means their systems recognize royal authority whether they want to or not. Marcus found himself continually amazed by the things that apparently came with royal education. Is there anything they don't teach future rulers? Humility, apparently, Serafina replied with dry humor. I am beginning to understand why my tutors emphasize the importance of practical experience. The shuttle was exactly where they'd seen it, a sleek combat transport designed for rapid deployment and extraction. It was also, unfortunately, guarded by two mercenaries who were clearly more interested in watching their back door than engaging in the firefight at the other end of the station. I can take them, Marcus said, studying their positions through the maintenance tunnel's exit grate. Both of them? I've done it before. The trick is to make them think the threat is coming from somewhere else. Marcus pulled two of the mining charges from his pack, small explosive devices designed for breaking up or deposits but perfectly adequate for creating distractions. When these go off behind them, they'll turn to investigate, and that's when I move. And if they do not turn, then we try something else. But professional soldiers always respond to explosions behind their position, it's trained into us from day one. Marcus set the charges with remote detonators, placing them in locations that would create maximum noise and confusion without actually killing anyone. He might be fighting mercenaries, but they were still people doing a job, even if it was a job he disagreed with strongly. Ready? He asked Serafina. Ready. Marcus triggered the charges. The explosions lit up the far side of the transport pad like a miniature aurora, sending debris and smoke billowing across the landing area. Both guards immediately spun toward the disturbance, plasma rifles raised and ready, which gave Marcus the opening he needed. He moved with the kind of fluid precision that came from years of combat training, covering the distance between the maintenance tunnel and the shuttle in a series of bounds that kept him below the guard's line of sight. By the time they realized the explosions had been a diversion, Marcus was already behind them with his rifle trained on both targets. Gentlemen, he said politely, I'm going to need you to set your weapons down and step away from the shuttle. They were good, Marcus had to give them that. Instead of immediately complying, they tried to coordinate a response that would give them tactical advantage. Unfortunately for them, Marcus had been expecting exactly that reaction. The first guard tried to spin and fire while diving for cover. Marcus stunned him with a non-lethal pulse that dropped him unconscious but alive. The second guard was smarter, throwing his weapon aside and raising his hands in surrender. Wise choice, Marcus said, keeping his rifle trained on the conscious mercenary while Serafina approached the shuttle's access panel. You realize, the guard said conversationally, that you're interfering with a lawful contract to retrieve royal property for protective custody. Royal property? Marcus raised an eyebrow. That's an interesting way to describe a princess. Technical terminology. Nothing personal. I'm sure. Marcus watched as Serafina placed her palm on the shuttle's biometric scanner, which immediately chirped acceptance and began cycling through its startup sequence. Though you might want to reconsider your choice of contracts. I'm pretty sure referring to members of royal families as property violates several interstellar treaties. Override accepted, Serafina called from the shuttle's entrance. Royal authority confirmed. All systems responding. Outstanding. Marcus backed toward the shuttle, keeping his rifle trained on the guard. You can tell Commander Corvash that Princess Serafina has chosen to exercise her right to self-determination. If he has a problem with that, he can file a complaint with whatever's left of the Confederacy government. This won't end here, the guard warned. There's too much at stake for people to just let her disappear. Maybe not, Marcus agreed, but it ends here for you guys. He joined Serafina in the shuttle's cockpit, where she was already running through pre-flight procedures with the kind of competence that suggested piloting was another skill they'd covered in royal education. Can you actually fly this thing? Marcus asked, strapping himself into the co-pilot's seat. In theory. I have simulation experience and some actual flight time in smaller craft. She engaged the main engines, which came online with a smooth hum of power. Though I should mention that my instructors always emphasize the importance of having qualified backup in case of emergencies. Great. I can fly atmospheric craft and basic orbital shuttles. Anything more complicated than that, and we're both learning as we go. Then we make a good team. The shuttle lifted off smoothly, rising above the mining station as plasma fire erupted from the remaining mercenaries who had finally realized what was happening. But they were too late, the shuttle's shields absorbed their shots easily, and within seconds they were out of effective weapons range. Where to? Marcus asked, studying the navigation display. Serafina was quiet for a long moment, staring at the star charts with an expression that suggested she was weighing options she'd never wanted to consider. I do not know, she said finally. For the past month, I have been focused entirely on survival, on staying ahead of whoever was hunting me. I had not thought beyond simply staying alive. Well, you're alive. That's a good start. Marcus activated the shuttle's communication array, scanning for friendly signals in the local system. What about loyalist forces? There have to be some military units that remained loyal to your family. Some, yes. But I do not know which ones, or where they are, or whether contacting them would simply reveal my location to my enemies. She rubbed her temples with the kind of tired gesture that spoke of too much stress and too little sleep. This is not how I imagined my reign beginning. Your reign. My father is dead, Marcus. That makes me the rightful ruler of the Celestial Confederacy, regardless of what my uncle or anyone else might believe. Her voice carried quiet determination mixed with something that sounded like fear. Though I confess I am not certain I know how to be a queen. Marcus studied her profile as she piloted their stolen shuttle through the void between worlds, noting the way she held herself with unconscious dignity even in the middle of a crisis that would have broken most people. For what it's worth, he said, you've been acting like a queen since the moment I met you. I just didn't recognize it because I was expecting crowns and fanfare instead of hypothermia and plasma fire. How so? You put other people's safety ahead of your own comfort. You took responsibility for problems that weren't your fault. You made hard decisions under pressure without losing sight of what was right. Marcus gestured toward the navigation display. And now you're worrying about how to serve your people instead of how to save yourself. That sounds like queen behavior to me. Serafina was quiet for several minutes, her attention focused on adjusting their course through an asteroid field that provided cover from any pursuit. When she finally spoke, her voice was thoughtful. My tutors taught me that leadership was about making correct decisions based on complete information and established protocols. But nothing they taught me covered situations like this: incomplete information, no established protocols, and consequences that affect entire star systems. Maybe that's because the situations that matter most are the ones that can't be covered in textbooks. What do you mean? Marcus considered his words carefully, thinking about the leaders he'd most respected during his military service and what had made them effective. The best officers I served under weren't the ones who followed the manual perfectly. They were the ones who understood that the manual was a starting point, not an ending point. They made decisions based on what the situation actually required, not what the regulations said should be required. And when those decisions went against established protocols, then they took responsibility for the consequences and made sure their people understood why the decision was necessary. Marcus looked at her directly. Which, from what I've seen, is exactly what you've been doing since yesterday. I have been making it up as I go along and hoping not to get anyone killed. Welcome to leadership, Marcus said with a grin. Though for what it's worth, your improvisational skills are pretty impressive. The communication array suddenly crackled to life with an incoming transmission on a frequency Marcus didn't recognize. Serafina's expression shifted to alert attention as she accepted the signal. Princess Serafina, a voice said, older, authoritative, and speaking with the kind of crisp precision that suggested military training. This is Admiral Helena Voss of the Third Fleet. We have been monitoring local communications traffic and believe you may be in need of assistance. Serafina and Marcus exchanged glances. This could be genuine help, or it could be another trap. Admiral Voss, Serafina replied carefully, I am indeed in need of assistance. However, current circumstances require that I be cautious about trusting unsolicited offers of aid. Understandable, Your Majesty. For verification, I served as your father's senior naval advisor during the Outer Rim conflicts. We met twice, once at the victory celebration on Centauri Prime, and once at the state funeral for Captain Morrison of the heavy cruiser Determination. Serafina's expression shifted to relief mixed with cautious hope. Admiral Voss. Yes, I remember. You wore the blue dress uniform both times, and you told me that my father was the finest commanding officer you had ever served under. That is correct, Your Majesty. Princess, the Third Fleet remains loyal to the Crown and to you as the rightful heir. We are prepared to provide protection and support while you decide how to address the current crisis. Marcus felt a weight he hadn't realized he was carrying lift from his shoulders. Professional backup, legitimate authority, and people who actually knew what they were doing in situations like this. Admiral, Serafina said, I accept your offer of assistance. What are your orders? First, we get you somewhere safe where you can think clearly and plan your next moves. Second, we begin the process of identifying which military and civilian units remain loyal to the legitimate government. Third, we figure out how to restore stability to the Confederacy without starting a civil war that tears the entire region apart. And fourth? Admiral Voss's voice carried a note of grim humor. Fourth, we make sure that whoever planned your father's assassination understands that murdering royalty has consequences that extend well beyond their ability to manage. Marcus found himself liking Admiral Voss already. Transmitting rendezvous coordinates now, the Admiral continued. We'll have you aboard the flagship within 6 hours, and then we can begin planning how to take back your throne. Admiral, Serafina said, I should mention that I am not alone. I am accompanied by Sergeant Marcus Stone of the Frontier Guard, who has provided invaluable assistance during my escape from hostile forces. Sergeant Stone is welcome aboard, Your Majesty. Anyone who helps protect the rightful Queen of the Confederacy has earned the gratitude of the Third Fleet. After the communication ended, Marcus and Serafina sat in comfortable silence as their shuttle adjusted course toward the rendezvous coordinates. The immediate crisis was over, but Marcus suspected that larger challenges lay ahead. So, he said finally, what happens now? Now I stop running and start fighting back, Serafina replied, her voice carrying new strength and determination. I reclaim my throne, restore stability to the Confederacy, and make sure that the people responsible for my father's death face justice. That's a pretty ambitious agenda. Yes. And I cannot do it alone. She looked at him directly. Marcus, I know this is far beyond anything you signed up for when you decided to help a freezing stranger, but I would like to ask you to consider staying on as my personal security advisor. Marcus blinked. Me? I'm just a frontier guard. You are a man who risked his own safety to save someone he knew nothing about, who adapted to impossible circumstances with creativity and courage, and who treated a princess like a person rather than a symbol. Serafina smiled. Those are exactly the qualities I need in someone I trust with my life and my reign. And if I say yes, then you help me figure out how to be the kind of queen my people deserve, instead of the kind of queen my tutors tried to train me to be. Marcus looked out at the stars ahead of them, thinking about his quiet life on frontier patrol and the simple satisfaction of helping people solve straightforward problems. Then he looked at Serafina, Queen Serafina, who was facing challenges that would determine the fate of billions of people across 17 star systems. Well, he said finally, I did say I preferred helping people who actually needed help. And you definitely qualify. Is that a yes? That's a yes, Your Majesty. Though I should warn you, my approach to security work is probably going to be about as unconventional as my approach to everything else. I would expect nothing less, she replied with a smile that transformed her entire face. After all, conventional approaches are what got us into this situation in the first place. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the newly rebuilt throne room of the Celestial Palace, watching as Queen Serafina met with a delegation of miners from the outer system colonies. She was dressed in formal robes that managed to be both regal and practical, and she listened to their concerns with the kind of focused attention that made each speaker feel like the most important person in the galaxy. The restoration of the Confederacy had been neither quick nor easy, but it had been successful largely because Serafina had insisted on governing as someone who understood both the burden of leadership and the value of treating people with dignity and respect. Your Majesty, one of the miners was saying, the new labor regulations have made a real difference in working conditions. Our people feel heard for the first time in decades. That was the goal, Serafina replied. A government that does not serve its people has no legitimate claim to power. Marcus smiled, recognizing the echo of conversations they'd had during those long days of planning the restoration campaign. The woman who had nearly frozen to death in an abandoned research station had become exactly the kind of leader the galaxy needed, someone who understood that authority was responsibility, not privilege. Sergeant Stone, she said as the delegation filed out of the throne room, a word? Yes, Your Majesty. I have been thinking about our conversation yesterday regarding the establishment of new frontier patrol protocols. The one where you suggested that helping strangers should be official policy rather than personal choice. That one. I believe we should expand the program system-wide. Train security personnel to prioritize civilian welfare over administrative efficiency, reward creative problem-solving, and establish clear protocols for situations where doing the right thing conflicts with following regulations. Marcus grinned. You want to institutionalize the kind of thinking that got me transferred away from my last posting? I want to make sure that the next time someone finds themselves stranded in a blizzard, there will be people trained to help first and ask questions later. She smiled. Though I hope future rescues will involve less stealing of spacecraft and fewer firefights with mercenaries. Where's the fun in that? Marcus, she said, her voice carrying both affection and exasperation, please tell me you are not hoping for more opportunities to improvise your way out of impossible situations. I'm not hoping for them, Marcus replied. But if they happen, I figure we're pretty good at handling them. Together. Together, she agreed, and Marcus reflected that sometimes the best partnerships were the ones that began with someone simply choosing to help when help was needed, regardless of the complications that might follow. After all, the most important decisions were usually the simple ones: help or don't help, stay or leave, trust or doubt. Everything else was just details.